know that Bob Mueller has ruled out Trump-Russia collusion in 2016. Do the Democrats need a new message ahead of this big election coming up in 2020? And can any of the Democratic candidates compete with President Trump on the actual issues here? How will that fare? Here to debate is partner at Stampede Consulting, Holly Turner, and former consultant for the Department of Homeland Security, Mustafa Tamiz. Guys, thanks for coming on this morning. Mustafa, going to start with you. Obviously, for your party, this was a rough weekend. What do you make of how this will fare in 2020 as you guys move that direction?
Well, I disagree. I think it's a good day when the nation's most respected prosecutor can say that the President of the United States was not involved in a criminal conspiracy.
And former consultant for the Department of Homeland Security, Mustafa Tamiz. It is a good day. It's a bad day for your morning. Mustafa, going to start with you. Obviously, for your party, this was a rough weekend. What do you make
from a
of
political standpoint, we still
how
don't
this will fare in 2020?
17 members of his campaign met with Russians over 100 times. I think it's a good day when the nation's most respected
I do think that the president is still in significant trouble because he's polling way under 50%, sometimes under 40%. And the sugar high from the $1 trillion tax cut in our economy is about to run out. We have the highest trade deficit that we've ever had. We've had the highest budget deficit that we've ever had. And the economy that's doing well, that we were told that we're going to be 3-4% GDP gains.
Let me go to Holly real quick.
Unfortunately.
And he's talking about the economy. I mean, a lot of people say 3.9% unemployment is not a sugar high. There's a lot of good news about the economy. If the economy stays strong, how do these 2020 guys, how do they handle the president coming up? Because now he's not under the cloud of investigation.
Right. Well, these 2020 candidates have got to be reconsidering why they even entered this race in the beginning. You know, they were not the only ones that were deceived by this collusion lie. Along with the American public, they assumed that all they had to do was get out of the primary and it would be a slam dunk against the president in the general election. So now they are going to have to come up with some real policies, and it's tough because we are living in the Trump economy. Lowest unemployment, highest wages. I mean, this is a great time. It's the most prosperity many of us have seen in our lifetime. So what are they going to bring to the table to offer to the American people? It's going to be a tough road for them.
Let's take a look at some numbers here. We've got some Fox News polls here comparing the candidates. If Biden and Trump went head to head, we've got Biden by about 7% right now. We even have Bernie Sanders beating the president at this point if the election was held today. And then you got Liz Warren and Kamala Harris both losing to the president by a point or two. Mustafa, that certainly seems like good news for your party. But again, polls don't always tell the full story. And you guys thought you had a slam dunk in 2016. It sounds like a lot of these candidates might think they have it again here in 2020.
Look, I mean, it's very early. There's a lot that can happen. But the fact of the matter is that the president has not made any attempt to expand beyond his base. And his base is not enough to get him over the finish line.
Can I jump in real quick? Are you worried about how far left your candidates are you worried about how far left your party is moving right now? Because that could be the detrimental factor.
I'm worried about I'm more worried about where the president is headed with his policies that are detrimental to our nations. Look what he's doing in North Korea. He's rolling back the sanctions that the rest of the bureaucracy, the rest of national intelligence organizations say that we should have on North Korea. He's rolling it back because he happens to be in love with Kim Jong-un. That makes no sense. The president is taking us in the wrong direction.
I do have to cut it.
That's why he's going to lose the election.
I know, we are out of time. Investigation costs a lot of money and took a lot of manpower.
That's right. Here's a look at just how much. Total spending, $25.2 million. Total staff, 40 FBI and intelligence analysts.
About 500 total witnesses, total subpoenas at 2,800. The result, 37 indictments, but none of them for the Russian collusion, which was the hard sell that it all started with.
And we asked if you think the full Mueller report should be made public, and reaction is mixed. Len on Facebook writes, only what is consistent with laws and regulations. It will probably go through the courts to try and force the issue. I think it's more important to get the rest of the story by investigating its origin and all players for violation of law.
Gail says absolutely want to see this phony investigation come to a resounding end and a full disclosure of the full amount of wasted dollars and time spent. It'll be very interesting to watch the rest of the media and the media as a whole, how they react to this over the next couple of days, how this all turns out.
It is far from over. We are just beginning right now. Also beginning, Fox and Friends. Have a good day.
It is 6 a.m. in Washington, D.C. We start this hour of Fox and Friends with the Fox News Alert. The Mueller report is in. The special findings special counsel's finding no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
All right, and in his initial review, Attorney General William Barr says Mueller didn't find enough evidence that President Trump obstructed justice, the president declaring victory.
It was a complete and total exoneration. This was an illegal takedown that failed. And hopefully, somebody's going to be looking at the other side.
Republicans say it's a great day for this country, but Democrats are pushing back, demanding more information and refusing to say that the report clears the president's name.
We have got a gigantic program. We've been waiting for this day to find out what was in the Mueller report, and so we have booked the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, is going to be with us. One of the smartest legal minds in the world, Alan Dershowitz and Jay Sekulow, also on the president's team.
We also have Mike Huckabee and Kellyanne Conway and Ken Starr. We have Congressman Mark Meadows, Congressman Jim Jordan, Jason Chaffetz, and many more.
Yeah, we're going to try to cover a lot of news today, but I tell you, the biggest story right now around the globe, and certainly in this country, are what William Barr came up with, and that is, along with Rod Rosenstein, which is brilliant, by the way, to have Rod Rosenstein still there.
Yep.
To say, like, okay, we pushed those
it.
guys aside. This is the guy that more than likely offered to wear a wire to wiretap the president. So they looked at this for a day and a half and said, here's your 4-page conclusion.
Well, Ron Rosenstein had already said that he was so alarmed by the bias between Strzok and Page. Right. And that's exactly what we're finding. We're going over all the media reports over the last 2 years. We're looking at the cost of this investigation and looking at how big the scope really was. It was 675 days, total cost $25.2 million, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 search warrants, obtained more than 230 orders for communication records, 50 orders to tap phones, 13 foreign government requests for evidence, and they interviewed 500 witnesses. Zero collusion was found between the president and Russia to influence this election.
Zero indictments. So the headline really is, despite what you have seen on some channels for the last 2 years, Donald Trump did not steal the election. They looked, and there was no evidence that there was any collusion between Trump and Trump's campaign and the Russians, even though the Russians really tried. This morning, when you pick up the newspapers, you're not going to believe the headlines. For instance, the New York Post today just simply says no collusion, no obstruction. The Daily News, Teflon Don, Mueller probe can't find collusion. The Attorney General says report does not exonerate him. And
even the New York Times.
This probably killed whoever had to type this in. Mueller finds no Trump-Russia conspiracy. And then it shows the letter and breaks down how they figured it all out.
So yesterday we were sitting in my apartment, and we had one TV on basketball. We had the TV on this Mueller report, and we were flipping around to all the different channels to find out how they were all covering it. And Fox News was of course the channel we started with, and Dana Perino and Ed did a great job covering that. But I printed out the letter, as we all did probably, and I was sitting at the dining room table going through it all and talking with my parents because they're visiting.
Talk about March Madness.
Exactly. You're exactly right. It's pretty incredible because they were looking at two different things. They were looking at collusion and they were looking at obstruction.
Right. So here's an excerpt from it. And basically it's right to the point. They looked at 675 pages and they boiled it down to 4 for now. And they're going to redact and they're going to take out the grand jury testimony and they'll release the rest of it eventually. And I imagine that'll be sooner than later. He said this: the special counsel's investigation did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia in its efforts to influence the 2016 election. It also went on to say that the Russians tried, and there was no acceptance on the other side. And if you were the President of the United States, now you understand, knowing that you didn't collude, and you hear it every day that you did collude, and you hear $25 million has been spent to prove that you did collude, and you have all these Democratic henchmen hired by Robert Mueller behind the scenes who you did not hire as FBI director, you can understand a frustrated president who just won an election and was never able to even revel in that election for maybe an hour before they wanted a recount.
Sure.
The electoral delegates weren't going to report. And then they said the Russians were involved in it.
Right. And because he knew that he hadn't colluded, he fired James Comey because of a variety of reasons. Back in the day, remember, every Democrat wanted James Comey fired for what he did to Hillary Clinton and reopening those investigations. So that prompted the whole obstruction of justice assessment. And this is what the Attorney General said regarding obstruction. After reviewing the special counsel's final report on these issues, consulting with department officials, including the Office of Legal Counsel, and applying the principles of federal prosecution that grade our charging decisions, DAG, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and I have concluded that the evidence developed during the special counsel's investigation is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense. The report identifies no actions that, in our judgment, constitute obstructive conduct. So, in other words, the Mueller report said, okay, we are not going to tell you whether or not to prosecute. We're going to lay out what we know. And that's what's going to be interesting about the Mueller report, to see they've got reasons why it looks like there could have been something, looks like there wasn't something. But nonetheless, it's all there. But Mr. Mueller himself just said, you know what, I'm not going to be the guy who's the decider on this.
Well, now Republicans and Democrats alike are saying they want to see the full report. But Mr. Barr spent the entire weekend mulling over that report, and he put it together in 4 pages for all of us, just a summary of what he found. But, you know, it begs to question who should now be held accountable for this, because this all happened because Hillary Clinton and the DNC hired Fusion GPS. They came up with this faux dossier. They wiretap Carter Page with the president's campaign, and then this opens up this whole investigation that you, the taxpayer, have spent $25 million on over the last 2 years. People want someone to be held accountable for all of this because they can't get away with this. This is the first time this has ever happened to a sitting president, and it's not fair to him. It's not fair to the people who support him. It's not fair to, the media. Think about that. They have spent the last 2 years. This has been a headline, a coverage. Shouldn't everyone be embarrassed by this?
Well, the president thought it was great. Just before he went via Air Force One from West Palm Beach to Washington, D.C., and on one side of the trip, he said this.
Just want to tell you that America is the greatest place on earth. The greatest place on earth. Thank you very much.
And that's the president. So he also spoke before he left. And then you got to wonder, he kept his tweets quiet almost all weekend long. And you got to wonder, as he golfed with first Kid Rock and then Trey Gowdy and Lindsey Graham, how he held his tongue. Because, I don't know, he had no communication with the Attorney General, but I guess he sensed when there was no more indictments and that news came out on Friday, that this could break positive for him. So he held his fire. Now, what's going to happen today is going to be fascinating. Let's bring in Jason Chaffetz. He was former chairman of Oversight Committee, and now we're lucky enough to have him here. It's been a long two and a half years. There hasn't been a moment where the president could actually say, can you believe I won? Now in 2019, he might be able to say, at least for a day, I won.
Based on this report and the full, total, complete exoneration of the President of the United States, it's as if Donald Trump won $100 million to nothing, because he actually, exactly what he said every single step of the way. But this is, there's still more to this, because we've got to go back and look at how this whole farce, started. Why was this special counsel put in place?
You think we're going back there?
Well, I think you have to. I think based on, first, the Inspector General's 500-plus page report, the senior echelon of the FBI, what they did and how they did it was highly questionable. We know that there is another investigation currently underway, probably wrapped up in the next 90 days, from Michael Horowitz.
What's he focused on?
Well, he's focused on the FISA abuse. He's focused on, did they take that bias and animus that was present? And what is it that they did after? Well, the idea that these people were so adamantly against the President of the United States, they hated Donald Trump, they disparaged him, they found these tens of thousands of tweets. They need to go back and look. Now, people were frustrated and said, did you use that to go out and not, prosecute Hillary Clinton? But the question is, did they use that proactively to then go after the president inappropriately?
Jason, do you think the evidence, the materials that prompted the FBI investigation, are going to be part of the Mueller report? They should be.
They have to be, right?
They should. Now, again, when I think Barr should go and testify before Congress. I do agree with Jerry Nadler. He should come there.
Yeah.
He
Good
should
luck
answer.
with that.
Yeah, good luck with that, because I think Barr will. I mean, if the Democrats want to continue to relive this, have at it, but there are certain materials that obviously can't be out there. Grand jury, there's all sorts of things that can't go out there. But the underlying premise of why this originally happened, that is a legitimate
Well, the double
investigation.
downers, they're not accepting these results. They really do not like the president, and they're disappointed, unfortunately, because it's great for our country. Democrats and Republicans that are in the middle would say that our president was not colluding with Russia. It should be a good thing. But Democrats still, yesterday, they were saying, okay, they didn't find any collusion, but obstruction. There wasn't enough evidence for obstruction. Listen to this.
His conclusions raise more questions than they answer. We will ask the Attorney General to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. We will demand the release of the full report.
It's not the end of everything.
The question for me that remains is, was he compromised? Why did he say that he believes Putin over the intelligence community? Why did he talk about leaving NATO? Things that put our national security at jeopardy. I think the House needs to move forward to answer all of these critical questions.
I want the whole damn report, because nobody, especially this president, is above the law.
And by the way, look at the size of that crowd. And that's for another time in California. Bernie Sanders got momentum. But here's the thing. He should have been watching our show, Tom Perez, because the President of the United States in 2010 was talking about NATO. They got to pay their fair share. He was saying, listen, Russia's looking out for themselves. And he was backing Mitt Romney's assessment that they're our number one foe. So I think that's important. The other thing to bring up, too, the Democrats got to ask themselves, do they want Jerry Nadler, Maxine Waters, and Adam Schiff to be the face of their party over the next 2 years? Or do they want these new candidates to be it? Because they're going to be saying investigate, investigate. And the American people are telling the candidates on this stump, they're not even asking about the Russia probe. So they got a political decision to make.
They do, because Adam Schiff has essentially just lied to the American people time and time again. How many shows did he go on and say that he had seen it firsthand under the guise of the fact that he had supposed classified information? I think the other thing that was very interesting in this Barr release on 4 pages is not only did the president not collude, he rebuffed the idea that there were multiple chances for them to participate, and they said no. So it's so totally polar opposite of what Nadler and others have said.
Have there been any Democrats who have apologized to the president yet? I said there was evidence of collusion, and I guess I was wrong.
No, they said they were going to fully accept the conclusion of Mueller.
Over and over again.
Over and over again. We should just accept it all. And now they're not. And the media, how in the world after 2 years of this drumbeat, I just...
What a perfect segue to this montage.
The new chairman of the House Intelligence Committee is vowing to investigate a bombshell new report about the president.
To this bombshell report from BuzzFeed.
If the BuzzFeed bombshell is true,
this is evidence of willingness to commit collusion.
I think they're all going to end up together in prison.
He was colluding with the leader of a hostile power.
So much involvement, so many connections with the Kremlin.
Trump now sits at the threshold of impeachment.
We are in high crimes and misdemeanor, and we are in impeachment territory.
Right. We are looking at the possibility that the President of the United States and those around him during an election campaign colluded with a hostile foreign power to undermine the basis of our democracy.
It's so obvious that they were eager to collude with Russia. Now we're seeing the evidence that there was a conspiracy to cover up.
He may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
Wow. That worked out well. Carl Bernstein, I mean, there's a whole lot of Watergate people getting their pink slips today. Carl Bernstein, I don't know how he gets out of bed, and John Brennan has to be so embarrassed. I wouldn't be surprised if they just disappear from the landscape, because they become firebrands, anti-Trumpers, and have put their whole resumes to bed.
I think the things that bothers me most are the people that had intelligence and classified, they were reviewing classified material. Schiff, Brennan, Clapper, Swalwell. These are the people that use their power and ability to see classified information to say, I know more than everybody else, and we've seen it, it's there. And look, the team that Mueller put together, these were not friends of the president. These were friends of the Democrats. There were people from the Clinton camp on this team. If they could have gotten the president, they would have, and they didn't.
Michael Isikoff had a source in the media and in and the FBI to write that book, that Russian book. And I'm wondering, he fed that. I'm wondering all these people with classified information, who they used as conduits to get into the mainstream, into the blood of this investigation.
Well, and again, that's what's so fundamentally wrong. But we have to go back and look at the genesis of this, because I think Mr. Mueller, we got to take our hat off to him and thank him for his service. But at the same time, I don't think they should have had this person in place in the first place. I think Comey set this up. I think it was a trap. He laid it down. He put out one of the strangest, weirdest tweets that I could possibly imagine.
Let's take a look together and try to figure it out. See the forest through the trees.
Yeah.
Okay. It says, so many questions. That's it.
What was great, Lindsey Graham's response? He responded on Twitter. He said, could not agree more. See you soon.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
A very bizarre picture. It was almost like he wanted to use this picture, and he said, okay, today's the day. I'm going to find a headline.
Hey, come on, Democrats, be honest about it. Nobody wanted to fire James Comey more than you did. I absolutely should. He should have been fired. And the president has the constitutional authority for whatever reason that he wants.
He didn't do himself any favors in the way he did it. And then meeting with the Russians the next day was coincidental, but bizarre. It was a series of events of unforced errors.
But that does not mean that there should be a special counsel that was put into place.
Will the full report be released?
You can't. This is why the Democrats set the bar so high, is they know between grand jury, classified information, executive privilege material.
You'll get a lot of it. We're going to get more of it because they're working on that right now.
Absolutely.
He said, Barr did say that was his goal, to release as much as he could.
The Inspector General chastised and said that James Comey was insubordinate for releasing information about somebody who was not indicted. And you can't just repeat that mistake. Barr understands this. He has to answer a lot of questions. And let's remember, and as Republicans, I think Republicans would be smart to make sure and say, we have got to go after the Russians, other nation states, and a guy in a van down by the river who wants to hack into this country.
Is this a win for the president in 2020?
Oh, the president is stronger politically than he's ever been right now.
Maybe he doesn't lose the midterms if there was no Russia investigation. Maybe you don't lose the House.
If the Republicans had done several things, but this was a factor. It was a cloud. It gave a talking point to every Democrat. It put Republicans back on their heels. And now they can go back and look at it and say, you all lied to us for the last 2 years.
Why should we ever trust you again?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it was definitely thorough. We want to hear from you at home, friends at foxnews.com. Please let us know what you think.
Yeah, we're just getting started. Jillian Milley's been tracking the other. Yeah, Jason, thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot we
were going to talk about Gronkowski. What happened?
I know. I misinterpreted the rundown.
Bait and switch told me we were talking about Gronk.
A very good tight end has retired and like to take his shirt off and drink beer. That's the story. All right, there you go, Jillian.
And nobody expected that to happen.
That's
it's
true.
a shock to all. Good morning, guys. Let's get you caught up on some of your other news that we're following, starting with this Fox News alert. Right now, the Israeli military reinforcing troops along the Gaza border following a rocket attack. 7 people were hurt when a rocket from the Gaza Strip destroyed a home north of Tel Aviv overnight. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now vowing retaliation and cutting his trip to the U.S. short. He'll meet with the president today and immediately after fly home. Vice President Mike Pence meeting the remains of a fallen American hero at Dover Air Force Base. Army Specialist Joseph Collette's body returning to the U.S. after he was killed in combat in Afghanistan. He leaves behind a wife. They were married just months before he was deployed. U.S. Army Green Beret Sergeant First Class Will Lindsay was killed alongside Collette. He leaves behind a wife and 4 daughters. The first wave of defendants accused in a massive national college admissions scandal will face a judge today. At least 12 of the 50 people charged are expected in a Boston courtroom. 7 of the 9 college coaches involved will be present, including fired legendary USC water polo coach Jovan Vavic. Actress Lori Loughlin heads to court next week. And March Madness now, top-seeded Duke. Did you see this? Surviving a scare from Central Florida in the final seconds.
Driving in, banks it up, no, put back, in and out, and Duke survives, just barely.
Just barely does count, though. Duke advances with a 77-76 win. Tennessee almost blows a 25-point lead before winning an overtime nail-biter over Iowa 83-77. And Oregon moves on after blowing out UC Irvine 73-54. So some good action over the weekend, guys.
How about that Duke game? The last second. Won.
Yep.
That almost broke every bracket in America. All right.
Yes.
Thanks, Jillian.
All right, thanks, Jillian. 19 minutes after the hour. What's the difference between the investigation into President Trump and how the Justice Department handled Hillary Clinton? Our next guest worked at the DOJ and takes us inside next. For President Trump and border security. The bill now moves to the House. I'm out of stuff. Now to Steve and Ainsley.
Oh, we have plenty today. President Trump and Republicans declaring victory after the long-awaited Robert Mueller report finds that there was no collusion with the Russians.
And our next guest praising President Trump's DOJ, saying that after years of biased Hillary Clinton investigations, they put politics aside.
Here to explain, former Department of Justice Deputy Director of Public Affairs, Ian Pryor. Ian, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So really, this is a tale of two investigations. You look at the FBI, they looked into Hillary Clinton, and that was started with the Obama administration, and then it morphed into eventually, in a lot of people's minds, the investigation of Donald Trump, based on we don't know what exactly from the FBI.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how things went in the Clinton investigation, it's clear that the Obama Justice Department really became a tool of the Democrats and the Clinton campaign. The way that they conducted the Clinton investigation, the way they did interviews not by the book, as we saw from Lisa Page's testimony, and then the way that the Trump investigation was opened up, it was clear that politics infected everything that the Obama Justice Department did. Now move over to the Trump Justice Department. You just had one of the most thorough investigations ever into its own president. 1,200 subpoenas, 500 witness interviews, 500 warrants executed, right? And they came to a result where they were looking for the truth. They weren't looking for a specific outcome that was predetermined. And I think more importantly, you have a president that's committed to the rule of law. Despite the tweets, despite what he said, he didn't fire Rod Rosenstein. He didn't order that Mueller be fired. Right. He let the investigation run its course. And now it's going to be very hard for Democrats and sort of the anti-Trump cartel to say that this investigation, the fix was in from the beginning, and it was a sham done by Trump appointees.
Yeah, you make a good point. If you read this 4-page letter to Congress, William Barr makes it clear that he did work with Rod Rosenstein. What's your reaction to how he handled the investigation and the fact that the president kept him on?
Well, I think you got to go back to Rod's initial decision to appoint special counsel, and you can agree with it or disagree with it. But looking back on it, I go back to what I just said. At the time, Andy McCabe was running this investigation. Rod had only been in office for roughly 3 weeks at the time. He didn't know the full details of the investigation, but what he clearly did know was that Andy McCabe was biased and should not be running this investigation. So he hands it over to a special counsel, Bob Mueller, unquestionable integrity, unquestionable professionalism. So now you have an investigation that's being done without bias to the president, and if it finds something, well, then that's important and we need to do something about it. And if it doesn't find something, as it didn't, then it's untainted, and it's going to be very difficult for people to say that that investigation was a sham investigation and that the fix was in. And the average American is probably sitting there thinking to themselves, well, look, this was a thorough investigation. Right. It's over. Let's finish this.
You know, when you think about it, though, Ian, the FBI unleashed its powers on a candidate who is running for president of the United States. That is an amazing first that we know of.
Yeah, and a lot of those actors, a lot of those bad actors are gone, but I think the next shoe to drop is going to be the Inspector General report on what happened with the FISA applications, what happened with the initiation of this investigation. Now remember, by the time the Trump Justice Department gets it, this investigation had been going on for a while. If they had just shut that down, if you think Democrats are going after impeachment now, just imagine what it would have been like if there was an investigation that was shut down. But I'm really interested to see how this all came about, and I think that's really going to be the next chapter in this story.
Well, you worked at the DOJ, and in this letter, Mr. Barr says that his goal is to release the full report, at least as much as he can, as long as it's allowed by law and department policies. Do you think that will happen? Will we be able to read the entire thing?
Well, I think we'll be able to read a lot of it. I mean, obviously, there's going to be redaction for grand jury material, national security information, potentially confidential sources. But I take Barr at his word, and I think Democrats are overreaching. I mean, the first thing, we need to see the report. That's the first thing that they said. Well, what happens if Barr gives them 95% of the report? What are they going to complain about then? I think Barr's a man of his word, and I think we are going to see most of the report.
But, if they give him 95%, they're going to complain that 5% is missing, and that could be the smoking gun.
Sure. I mean, I think they're always going to complain about everything over there. But at that point, people realize that it's just politics.
You know
they
what?
realize that the law has come out on the president's side.
No matter how you feel about it, it was definitely a thorough investigation. If you look at this, 19 lawyers, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 search warrants, interviewed 500 witnesses. So you got to take it at its word, and you have to believe that there is no collusion and no obstruction based on this finding.
Yeah, clearly not. I think this is a huge win for the president. I saw somebody tweet, I think it was Brian tweeted yesterday that officially the president won the 2016 election. Well, I go so far to say officially the president just won the 2020 election.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Boom. All right, Ian Pryor used to be with the Department of Justice. Sir, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Meanwhile, now that President Trump's been cleared of collusion, is it time to investigate the investigators, as we were just talking about? We've got an all-star panel weighing in on that coming up next.
Before I even got elected, it began. It's happened. A lot of horrible things happened. A lot of very bad things happened for our country. It was just announced there was no collusion with Russia, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. So it's complete exoneration, no collusion, no obstruction.
And that was a dream come true for the president. Our all-star panel here to put it all in perspective. Let's meet him. Former FBI Assistant Director Mark Morgan back with us. Constitutional law attorney Jenna Ellis is here, who's also a Trump 2020 advisory board member. And Kristen Soltis Anderson is here, columnist for the Washington Examiner, and a guy I've met in person, but he doesn't want me too close. Greg Jarrett, attorney and Fox News analyst and author of The Russian Hoax. First off, let's start with you, Greg. Greg, this comes out yesterday in 4 pages. They boiled down 675 pages. What surprised you most in the 4 pages?
Well, that Robert Mueller dodged his responsibility. I mean, he was hired as the chief prosecutor to make a decision on obstruction of justice as well as collusion. He clearly found no collusion, but then he abdicated his responsibility and gave it to William Barr. But I think he did that for a reason. You know, he wanted to put out there, well, the president is not guilty of a crime, but he's not exonerated either. That's a cheap shot. That's what prosecutors do when they lose a case in front of a jury. Then they say, well, the jury found him not guilty, but that doesn't mean he's innocent. That's what Robert Mueller was doing.
Right. Mark, you know all the players here. You know the people who have been disparaged, justifiably so, in the FBI. You know Robert Mueller. You know James Comey. So Mueller came out and says, I can't tell. Part of the reason why he can't tell if there's obstruction is because Donald Trump is unorthodox, to say the least. He did his obstruction in plain view and made people wonder, what's he doing?
Yeah, so I agree with Greg the way he captured that. I was disappointed in that. But let's look, and you've talked about this already, but I think it's important to remind everybody. 2,800 subpoenas, 500 interviews, 500 search warrants, 40 FBI people, $22 million in excess, and on and on and on. And so what that should tell the American people is what people have been saying. This was a thorough, complete, and exhaustive investigation. And I think a nuance that's not really being talked about enough. Again, I'm not a political guy. I'm a law enforcement guy. And what this does is it does exonerate the president 100% from a legal perspective on both the obstruction of justice and collusion. Everything else that we're talking about now is all political. Right. The door has been shut legally on collusion and obstruction of justice. End of story. Right. He is exonerated.
But there's nothing the end of story when Jerry Nadler based his whole career on getting the president, who they have a 30-year rivalry. Here's an example. He sat down there on the streets of New York, being heckled left and right, by the way, and here's what he said happens next.
We will ask the Attorney General to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. We will demand the release of the full report. The Attorney General's comments make it clear that Congress must step in to get the truth and provide full transparency to the American people.
I'm sure they'll get the AG, don't you think, Kristen? He'll show up.
Sure. And look, it's a bipartisan thing to say we want this report to be as transparent and open as possible. In fact, given the summary that Attorney General Barr put forward, it makes sense that Republicans and supporters of the president would want this out there to fully clear the president's name. This is something that when I've been taking a look at polls early on in this investigation, you did have fairly bipartisan support, not for the idea of necessarily investigating the president himself, but let's find out what Russia was trying to do. And this is where Bob Mueller did find a lot of information about what other people may have been trying to do to the United States, but found that there weren't Americans sort of playing ball with him. As the investigation went on, approval for Bob Mueller, the idea that this was a witch hunt, began to grow and grow in the polls. I fully expect Democrats to now say Bob Mueller, who they'd been holding up as sort of a savior, to now his favorables are going to drop quite a bit among Democrats now that this conclusion has been reached that there was no collusion.
Paul Manafort is not good at paying taxes and disclosing finances, and looks like Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was set up. And it leads me to you, Jenna. Now, I know you're a member of 2020 and you want things to work out for the president, but in this way it has. Do you think the president should back any type of movement to investigate the investigators?
Absolutely. And, this isn't a partisan effort to say that equal justice under the law means that everyone is seeking truth. And no matter if you have an R or a D after your name, everyone wants to know exactly what happened during the 2016 election. And that shouldn't just be limited to President Trump, but should also cover everyone who is potentially involved. I mean, you have Brennan, you have Strzok and Page, you have McCabe, you have all of these people who are part of the deep state who clearly had it out for President Trump. We know that there was Russia collusion. We just know that there was nothing whatsoever associated with Trump or anyone on his campaign or his team or in the White House. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at what else happened in 2016. And that's something that the American people deserve, because we deserve to know legitimacy in our law enforcement and be able to trust that they will investigate whether there's an R or a D after your name.
And let me just tell you something. The average American person is out there going, we got to get prescription drug prices down. We got to get health care that works. And we do have a catastrophe at the border and it needs to be addressed by both sides. We don't need any more Russia investigation. And after 2.5 years, I think we can agree on that. Guys, thanks so much. You two ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, you got it. Meanwhile, coming up straight ahead, Robert Mueller's report triggering a meltdown for many Democrats in the left-leaning media.
What we don't have, though, is an answer, Julia, on all of the so-called smoke, all of the questions.
This isn't getting resolved in this country until November 2020.
Oh, really? What will it take for them to actually come to terms with no collusion?
New England Patriots star Rob Gronkowski is retiring. The tight end making the announcement on Instagram saying he will, quote, move forward with a big smile after 9 seasons and 3 Super Bowl wins. His 2017 victory leading him to the White House, where this happened.
Can I just... some help? I think I got this, but thank you. Maybe. All right, thanks, man.
It's unclear what Gronk will do next, but part of me believes maybe some, partying, some cruises, some party boats. Isn't that what he does? Back to you guys.
Probably
back again.
All right. Thank you very much, Jillian. Meanwhile, Robert Mueller's no collusion findings are not sitting well with certain members of the mainstream media.
Politically, the toothpaste is already out of the tube, as they say.
Yeah.
So, this isn't getting resolved in this country until November 2020.
There is a very big difference between trying to get enough evidence for a criminal charge, president or not, and to start impeachment proceedings against the president for obstruction of justice.
And Democrats want to assert their constitutional role, which is typically theirs, not Bill Barr's, to determine any potential obstruction. Bob Mueller did not find a chargeable election conspiracy.
Okay, so with more of the media's reaction, Joe Concha, media reporter for The Hill and new radio talk show host here in New York. Joe, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Over the last couple of years, there have been members of the media. Some of them have said, let's just wait for Robert Mueller's investigation to come out. And others have just been able to present, without any evidence, they've said, we have evidence of collusion. And yesterday, that was put to bed.
All I know is, Steve, that throughout these last 22 months, gossip was treated as gospel. Sources providing information to reporters all too willing to accept it, like seagulls at the beach. And look, this is a day of reckoning for our media like we haven't seen since the 2016 election. I would say maybe the worst day ever for our media, given all of that coverage and the pushing of that particular narrative around Russia collusion. The Washington Post and New York Times, Molly Hemingway pointed this out, won Pulitzers for their reporting on Russian collusion. All we heard about was walls are closing in, noose is tightening, and this is the beginning of the end. And now we're hearing, even yesterday and this morning, this is the beginning of something else, the next chapter. You know why? Because it's good for ratings and because people want to believe the worst about this president.
There's an item this morning, Joe, in Axios that says that apparently the president is going to plan to call for organizations to fire members of the media and former government officials who he believes made false accusations about him. So do you think there could be a day of reckoning for these people who said, oh, absolutely, there's collusion?
I don't think it's up to the government to hire and fire certain media people. That's up to the organizations, the news organizations that employ them. But from what I've seen, Steve, how many Russian collusion stories did we see where an organization, reporters got it wrong, and there were actual consequences? I can only name once, really on a major level, with CNN and Anthony Scaramucci, and 3 reporters got fired. Outside of that, there haven't been suspensions. There probably haven't been reprimanded in corner offices somewhere. And remember, think of the stories we missed as a result of Russia. The economy's performance as it pertains to wages or unemployment or growth. The destruction of the ISIS caliphate. That suddenly came out of nowhere, it seemed to a lot of people, because no one was really covering it. And the most overlooked story, the opioid epidemic, 70,000 people killed in 2017 alone. That's more than car crashes. You hardly hear about that. And that's what affects real Americans' lives. Steve.
A wake-up call for everybody. All right, Joe, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good to see you.
All right. What do you think about that? Email us, friends@foxnews.com. We're also on Facebook. Meanwhile, coming up, Fox News alert, Benjamin Netanyahu cutting his trip to the United States short after a rocket hits a home near Tel Aviv. The breaking news from overnight in Israel coming up. And the special counsel's report, not enough for the